part two of the coming inflation. We were just saying how your collective groups, if the collective groups, churches, different groups would have bought land long time ago, those that had multiplied numbers using the principle of multiplication, those leases would come back. So like Joseph, those churches in the time of trouble could sustain people. The principle was used by Father Divine in 1933 during the Depression. And he owned many of the real estate, much of the real estate rather, many of the buildings downtown, down in Harlem. If you Google him, he'll come up. And his members lived there for free. Of course, everything they had, they submitted to the ministry. But the point is, housing, food, lavish banquets that they had, and necessities was dealt with first and foremost by a collective effort. Now, I'm not suggesting that be like that pattern, but the point we're making is, if you looked at part one, you saw and heard the documentary explain why the dollar is shrinking and could lose its power based on one thing happening. So our appeal was to collective groups. There's a church in Las Vegas, for example, City Impact, built a complex, a little mini rise for their seniors, first and foremost, sheltering them from things to come, ruthless rising of rents, and especially for those disabled and stuff. It seems like the church was ahead of what was coming in Las Vegas, which now is many of the seniors that I know in Las Vegas cannot afford the rent by private owners who doubled down on the rent in 30-day notice in some cases. In one case particular. And that was what they were giving. And to move, all of a sudden you had to have 3 times the amount. Whereas before, people disabled on Social Security, walking around with breathing tanks and stuff, would have been accepted, welcomed gladly in Las Vegas before the Raiders opened up the stadium. Now, I don't know if that had an impact on it, and many Californians, they say, and different people from around the country moved to Vegas, which drove up the rents. Now, that is true. I'm an eyewitness. And I would say this. So then the ministry, before that happened, they were building during COVID-19. Okay? We didn't know, we knew the shaking had came, but we didn't know where on the Richter scale as far as crushing the poor, who God loves, Micah 2:1-2, and not having a place to live on God's green earth is terrible stewardship. Or whoever say they so-called are the leader, and being in debt to banks all your life, paying interest for whatever you got done, I don't know if that's the way to go. Leviticus 25:36 says, "You shall not take of usury of silver or money for profiteering, or from food dealing with those that are poor." And therefore, we're talking about, if you can't give it nothing else, give it the working poor then, who make the trillions of dollars for those that run the companies. So we're going to listen in from this angle. I'm going into part 2. And if you listen to part 1, then you heard the documentary as far as the gentlemen breaking down the coming inflation.
Pay down debts and raise your FICO scores, increase your buying power, and then making solid investments, man, whatever it may take. Again, you have all these different avenues that you, as a group, if one could put 1,000 in flight, 2 could put 10,000 in flight with God on your side. So when you begin to really seriously look and put your pennies together, cut out, you can invest off of just cutting off fast foods, all of it, and use that money to buy some kind of ownership or asset to buffet what's coming down the road, because we're already, some say, at 10% real inflation rate. So that means your dollar is losing its buying power, man. So if that's the case, just getting more money, I don't know if that's the answer, but doing more investments, at least you guys can help each other and feed your kids in hard times. Hope something we said helped. Jeremiah 23 and 11.
So that's the conclusion. We just want to say, keep going and know that, hey man, without investing as collective groups, and especially churches, you can do a lot of damage as far as possessing lands. And did not God lead the children of Israel to do that? Okay then. So biblical faith would be ownership, not debt to banks. Is it a blessing to be consumed by a bank, especially if your credit is weak? Or is that making the person a servant to the lender? So the real leaders would lead the people to debt-free lives that care about the flock. Other than that, man, we can exploit the poor through mechanisms, different systems and ideologies and things like that, but everybody's doing that. Where's the salt? So in the end, we see Joshua 1. People should be debt-free. If your leadership is worth the salt, they should have been taught self-control, discipline, stewardship, and the fear of God, dealing with the money and led by the Spirit, if they're fully equipped, right? So if they refinanced and bought flossy stuff, because everybody's doing it, well, we should have spoke on it way back then. Because whoever's in debt is servant to the lender. That's one thing that showed me that in the Bible, in the Old Testament, except for in bondage or in slavery. So would the real Moses step up and real Joshua's show the people, whoever you are, whoever your business is, the way to true freedom is debt-free and not in bondage to the banks. That's all we're saying. God bless you, Jeremiah 23 and hoods.